20 models failed to conquer the millionaire, but the humble maid conquered him in 1 minute in the garden, and so they began a beautiful story of ups and downs. But before we dive into the complete story, tell me where you are watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's begin. The rain lashed against the windows of the luxury penthouse on Park Avenue, each drop like a tiny bullet striking the glass. Danielle Carter watched the storm from inside the elevator as it climbed smoothly toward the top floor, her reflection a pale ghost against the polished brass doors. In her trembling hands, she clutched a small plastic stick that had changed everything. Positive. Twins. 24 years old, a waitress from Queens, and now pregnant with not one but 2 babies. Danielle took a deep breath as the elevator announced her arrival with a soft chime. Jackson's private elevator, requiring a special key he had given her for their clandestine meetings over the past 8 months. The penthouse door opened into a world so removed from her reality that it sometimes felt like stepping into a movie set. Vast windows offered a panoramic view of Central Park, now obscured by sheets of rain. Modern art pieces worth millions adorned the walls. She recognized a Basquiat from a magazine she'd once flipped through while waiting for a bus. Jackson Tate stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his tall figure silhouetted against the stormy sky, phone pressed to his ear. At 32, he was everything Danielle had been raised to believe was unattainable for someone like her. Princeton-educated, heir to the Tate Industries fortune, and one of New York's most eligible bachelors. "We'll close at 20 million, not a penny more," he was saying, his confident smile revealing perfect teeth. "Their board has until tomorrow morning?" "Yes, exactly." He turned, noticing Danielle, and his smile widened. "I need to go. Something important just came up." 8 months ago, Danielle had been serving champagne at a charity gala, a temporary waitressing job to supplement her income. Jackson had noticed her immediately. She felt his eyes following her around the room long before he approached her for a private conversation. The attraction had been immediate, intense, intoxicating. Despite the glaring differences in their social standings, Danielle had allowed herself to dream of a future together. "We need to talk," she said after he hung up, her voice steadier than she expected. Jackson crossed the room, stopping at a crystal decanter to pour himself bourbon. "Sounds serious. Drink?" "No, thank you." She remained standing, her coat still on, raindrops sliding down the cheap fabric. "What's wrong, Danny?" "You look pale." The nickname that once sounded affectionate now felt patronizing. Danielle inhaled deeply and spoke the words she had rehearsed dozens of times on the subway ride over. "I'm pregnant, Jack. With twins." The silence that followed seemed to stretch into eternity. Jackson's hand froze midway to his lips, bourbon catching the light. Slowly, deliberately, he placed the glass down on the marble countertop. His expression transformed from surprise to something colder, something calculated. "Are you sure they're mine?" he asked, his voice flat. The question hit Danielle like a physical blow. She took an involuntary step backward. "How can you ask me that? You know there hasn't been anyone else." Jackson laughed, a short, cruel sound that bore no resemblance to the warm laughter she had grown to love. "A waitress from Queens," he said, shaking his head as if amused by a child's naive statement. "Did you really think you had a place in my life? That I would introduce someone like you to my family? To my business associates?" Each word was a knife, methodically inserted between her ribs. Danielle felt her dream crumbling, replaced by a horrifying reality she had refused to see. "I thought what we had was real," she whispered. "Real." Jackson walked to his mahogany desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a checkbook. "It was temporary entertainment, Danny. Nothing more." He began writing, the scratch of his pen against paper the only sound besides the rain. "You and these bastards would be nothing but a burden to my future. I have Tate Industries to run, a legacy to protect." He glanced up, his blue eyes cold. "People like you are born to serve, never to belong. Danielle stood rooted to the spot, tears beginning to stream down her face, mirroring the raindrops on the windows. "I don't want your money for an abortion." "Don't be stupid." Jackson tore the check from the book and held it toward her. $10,000, enough for the procedure and for you to disappear from my life. When she didn't move to take it, his face hardened. "What are you going to do? Raise 2 kids alone on your waitress salary? Good luck surviving the first month." Anger flared through Danielle's grief. "I'll manage." "Of course you will," he mocked, tearing the check into pieces. He reached for his wallet, extracted several bills and tossed them in her direction. They fluttered to the floor like wounded birds. "Here, $20 for your taxi. Go back to the trash you came from. That's your real place in the world." Danielle stared at the money on the floor, then at the man she had foolishly believed loved her. In that moment, something shifted inside her, a hardening, a resolve forming beneath the pain. Without a word, she turned and walked to the elevator, leaving the $20 where they had fallen. "They'll destroy your life," Jackson called after her. "You'll regret not taking my offer." The elevator doors closed on his words, and Danielle leaned against the wall, her body shaking with silent sobs. By the time she reached the lobby, the trembling had stopped, replaced by a numb determination. She stepped out into the torrential rain without an umbrella, letting it soak through her clothes as she walked away from the gleaming building. The following weeks were a nightmare of pure survival. Her roommates, tired of late rent payments, asked her to leave their shared apartment. Danielle found herself alternating between women's shelters and cheap weekly rentals, the kind with stained carpets and locks that barely worked. Her pregnancy rapidly became visible, her petite frame quickly showing the twins she carried. One Tuesday morning, the restaurant manager called her into his office, eyes avoiding hers as he explained, "Our customers expect a certain appearance, Danielle. You understand." She understood perfectly. She was being fired for being pregnant and unmarried. No one said it explicitly. They didn't have to. Desperation drove her to take 3 low-paying jobs, cleaning corporate offices in the financial district before dawn, waiting tables at a Brooklyn diner during the day, and sewing uniforms at a small factory in Queens at night. Her hands became calloused, her feet swollen, her body exhausted, but her determination grew with each passing day, fueled by the tiny movements she began to feel inside her womb. One cold October morning, while scrubbing the floor of an office on the 42nd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, Danielle paused to look out the window. Below her, the city that had welcomed her with promises and then betrayed her with cruelty was beginning to wake up. In the distance, she could see the Tate Industries building, imposing against the dawn sky. "One day," she whispered to her prominent belly, "one day we'll return to this place, but it will be on our terms. He said we were born to serve, but I'll prove that we were born to lead. I promise you, my children, that he will swallow every word he said about us." Later that same morning, Danielle noticed an advertisement in a newspaper someone had left behind. The Bronx Community College was offering scholarships for single mothers in vulnerable situations. With trembling hands, she tore out the announcement. This would be the first stone of the empire she would build from the ashes of her broken heart. That evening, while serving coffee at the diner, she glanced up at the television mounted in the corner. Jackson's face filled the screen, his arm around a stunning blonde woman, both smiling for cameras at some gala event. The caption identified her as oil heiress Catherine Reynolds and mentioned their new engagement. 2 months. It had taken him just 2 months to replace her completely, to erase any trace of what they had shared. A customer snapped his fingers, demanding a refill. "Hey, waitress! Coffee!" Danielle turned away from the screen, the pot steady in her hand as she poured. The customer didn't thank her, didn't even look at her face. She was invisible, just part of the service landscape. "Will there be anything else, sir?" she asked mechanically. "Yeah," "A smile wouldn't kill you," he grunted, still not looking up from his newspaper. As she walked back to the counter, Danielle placed a protective hand over her growing belly. The exhausted waitress with $20 in her pocket and twins in her womb couldn't possibly know that. 15 years later, she would return to that same building not as a supplicant, but as its owner. The $20 lay on the polished floor of Jackson's penthouse, a symbol of her worth in his eyes. Danielle walked through the rain without an umbrella, each frigid drop mingling with her tears until she couldn't distinguish between them. By the time she reached the subway station, her clothes were sodden, clinging to her body like a second skin. A woman with a kind face offered her a tissue, which Danielle accepted with trembling fingers. "Are you all right, honey?" the woman asked. Danielle couldn't find her voice to answer. How could she explain that her entire world had just collapsed, that the father of her unborn children had valued them at $20? The next morning, Danielle returned to the cramped two-bedroom apartment in Queens she shared with 3 other women. Melissa, an aspiring actress who worked the same catering company, looked up from her coffee with concerned eyes. "Where were you all night?" "I was worried." Danielle's hand instinctively went to her still flat stomach. "I need to tell you something." 20 minutes later, after she'd revealed everything, the pregnancy, Jackson's cruel rejection, the atmosphere in the apartment had shifted palpably. "So, when are you due?" asked Tina, the oldest roommate, her expression guarded. "April," Danielle whispered. The women exchanged glances. "Look," Tina said finally, "we love you, but we can barely make rent as it is. A baby—" "Twins," Danielle corrected quietly. "Jesus, twins?" Tina sighed. "We can't have 2 screaming newborns here. Most of us work nights, sleep days." "I understand," Danielle said, though the reality of her situation was only beginning to sink in. "I'll find somewhere else." 2 weeks later, Danielle stuffed her meager possessions into a duffel bag under the watchful eyes of her now former roommates. They'd given her until the end of the month, but every day in the apartment had become increasingly uncomfortable, filled with awkward silences and pointed remarks about noise and space. "I put together some vitamins and things," Melissa said, handing her a small package. "Call me if you need anything." But both women knew the call would never come. Friendship was a luxury Danielle could no longer afford. That night marked her first in the women's shelter on East 45th Street, a converted office building with flickering fluorescent lights and the persistent smell of bleach. The communal bedroom housed 12 women, each with their own thin mattress on metal-framed bunk beds. Danielle lay awake, one hand protectively covering her belly, listening to the symphony of snores, coughs, and muffled crying around her. The woman in the bunk above her tossed restlessly, the frame creaking with each movement. "First night's the hardest," whispered a voice from the adjacent bed. "I'm Shanice." "Danielle." "Baby?" Shanice nodded toward Danielle's protective posture. "Babies. Twins." Shanice let out a low whistle. "Lord have mercy. You got family?" "Number just me." "Then you better be strong, girl. Stronger than you ever thought possible." Those words echoed in Danielle's mind the following week as she stood before Bernard, the manager of Chez Michel, the upscale restaurant where she'd worked for the past year. "I'm sorry, Danielle," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Our clientele expects a certain appearance from our staff." "I'm barely showing," she protested, though the twins had made themselves visible far earlier than a singleton would have, her petite frame already developing a distinctive curve. "It's not just that, it's what comes after." Bernard gestured vaguely. "The time off? The scheduling complications? We're a business, not a charity." She left with her final paycheck and a reference letter that felt like cold comfort. Outside, November wind cut through her thin jacket as panic rose in her throat. 3 jobs lost in 3 weeks. First catering, then the cocktail lounge, now this. By 5 o'clock the next morning, Danielle stood shivering in a line of 40 women outside a commercial cleaning company in the financial district. The woman behind her, older with calloused hands and weary eyes, sized her up. "First time?" Danielle nodded. "They'll hire you if you're pregnant," the woman said matter-of-factly. "Nobody sees you when you clean at night. Just don't expect maternity leave." By noon, Danielle had secured her first new job, office cleaning from midnight to 6 a.m., 6 days a week. By evening, she'd added a waitressing position at a grimy diner in Brooklyn, serving the breakfast and lunch shifts. 3 days later, she completed her punishing schedule with evening work at a small garment factory in Queens, sewing uniforms for hotel staff. Her first week nearly broke her. The physical demands of scrubbing floors all night, serving tables all morning, and hunching over a sewing machine all evening sent shooting pains through her back. Morning sickness became all-day sickness, forcing her to vomit quietly in bathroom stalls between tasks. Her feet swelled until removing her shoes each night became an exercise in agony. In her second month at the shelter, Danielle managed to rent a tiny room in a boarding house in the Bronx, a converted closet barely large enough for a twin bed and a small dresser, with a shared bathroom down the hall. At $150 weekly, it consumed most of her earnings, but offered precious privacy. Each night, she would count her money, dividing it into essential piles: rent, transit, food. The prenatal vitamins recommended by the free clinic were filed under "if possible," along with new shoes to accommodate her swelling feet. "I need to eat better," she whispered to her growing belly one evening, having subsisted on diner leftovers and day-old bread from the bakery near the garment factory. "You deserve better than this." Her first prenatal appointment at the public clinic came at 16 weeks. After 3 hours in a crowded waiting room, Dr. Peterson, a harried but kind-eyed woman, examined her with brisk efficiency. "You're underweight," she stated, frowning at the chart. "And your blood pressure is concerning. Are you getting enough rest?" Danielle thought of her 18-hour workdays, the constant movement, the 4 hours of sleep she managed between shifts. "I'm trying." The doctor's expression softened. "These babies need you healthy. Is there any family who could help? The father, perhaps?" "There's no one," Danielle said firmly. "Just me." Dr. Peterson sighed. "Then we need to discuss your work situation. This schedule isn't sustainable through pregnancy." But Bills didn't care about medical advice. The next morning, Danielle was back at the diner, pouring coffee with shaking hands, ignoring the concerned glances from regular customers who noticed her pallor. It was during one of her night cleaning shifts, at 3 in the morning in an empty office building on Wall Street, that Danielle found herself pausing by a window on the 42nd floor. Below, Manhattan sprawled like a glittering constellation, beautiful and indifferent to her suffering. In the distance, the Tate Industries building stood illuminated, a beacon of the privilege that had briefly touched her life before casting her aside. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass. "Do you see that?" she whispered to her belly. "That building belongs to your father. He said we were nothing, that we belonged in the trash." The twins fluttered in response, their movements becoming more distinct each day. "One day," she continued, her breath fogging the window, "we'll return to this place, but it will be on our terms. He said people like us were born to serve, never to belong. I promise you, my babies, that he will swallow every word he said about us." That same morning, as dawn broke over the city, Danielle was emptying trash bins when she noticed a newspaper left open on a desk. A small advertisement caught her eye. "Bronx Community College, special scholarship program for single mothers in need, full tuition, flexible schedule, childcare assistance." With trembling hands, she carefully tore out the notice, folding it into her pocket like a talisman. For the first time since that rainy night in Jackson's penthouse, a fragile hope took root. Later that day, between her diner and factory shifts, Danielle stopped at a public library to use their computer. She spent precious minutes researching the scholarship, learning it was funded by a foundation started by a former single mother who had become a successful entrepreneur. As she read the woman's story, from welfare to CEO, something shifted in Danielle's perspective. Perhaps there was a path forward, one that didn't end in perpetual struggle and poverty. That evening, while threading industrial needles under harsh fluorescent lights, her swollen fingers cramping, Danielle made a decision. These 3 brutal jobs would be temporary, just long enough to survive the pregnancy and early months with the twins. Then she would find a way to qualify for that scholarship. Education. That would be her escape route, her way to ensure her children never knew the desperation she now lived with daily. The exhausted waitress who observed Jackson on television, announcing his engagement to an oil heiress while she served coffee to dismissive customers, didn't know that in little more than a decade, it would be she who appeared on those same screens, while he desperately sought a glimpse of the woman he had once considered disposable. Danielle's hands trembled as she opened the letter, her heart racing as she scanned the official letterhead of Bronx Community College. 8 months pregnant, her swollen ankles protesting after a double shift at the diner, she'd found the envelope waiting in her tiny rented room. Dear Ms. Carter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as a recipient of the Florence Jenkins Memorial Scholarship for Single Mothers. Tears blurred the rest of the words. She pressed a hand to her mouth, the other instinctively cradling her enormous belly where the twins shifted restlessly, as if sensing her emotion. We did it, she whispered, caressing the taut skin. This is just the beginning. 3 weeks later, Danielle waddled into her first class at Bronx Community College, ignoring the curious glances of younger students as she eased her 9 months pregnant body into a desk. She'd chosen business administration with a focus on technology, fields that promised stability and growth. Though she'd reduced her work schedule, she still cleaned offices pre-dawn and worked weekend shifts at the diner, sleeping barely 4 hours a night. Professor Williams, a stern-faced woman in her 50s, paused mid-lecture when Danielle entered. Glad you could join us, Ms. Carter. Danielle Carter. The professor nodded briskly. Take detailed notes, Ms. Carter. I don't repeat myself. Danielle pulled out a worn notebook, a far cry from the sleek laptops surrounding her, and began writing meticulously, determined not to miss a word despite the twins performing what felt like somersaults against her ribs. This became her new normal, waking at 4, cleaning until 8, rushing to classes until 2, working the diner until 10, then studying until her eyes burned. Every moment was accounted for, every ounce of energy directed towards survival and advancement. On a crisp October morning, during Professor Rivera's Introduction to Computing class, Danielle felt the first contraction. She gripped the edge of her desk, breathing through the sudden pain, determined to finish the lecture. Professor Rivera, a petite woman with intelligent eyes, noticed immediately. Ms. Carter, are you all right? I'm fine, Danielle insisted, even as another contraction gripped her. Just a practice contraction. The professor approached, her expression concerned. That didn't look like practice. How far along are you? 39 weeks with twins. A murmur ran through the classroom. Someone call an ambulance, Professor Rivera ordered, then more gently to Danielle. Your babies are coming. This lecture can wait. 20 minutes later, Danielle was wheeled into Mount Sinai Hospital, gripping the sides of the gurney as contractions intensified. The admitting nurse took her information with brisk efficiency. Father of the babies? She asked, pen poised over the form. Not involved, Danielle managed between breaths. Emergency contact? The question hung in the air. Danielle realized with a pang that there was no one to call, no one waiting anxiously for news. I don't have one, she finally said. The nurse's eyes softened momentarily before returning to professional detachment. Let's get you to delivery then. The next 14 hours were a blur of pain, sweat, and clinical voices. Alone in the delivery room except for medical staff, Danielle channeled every ounce of her determination into bringing her children safely into the world. Push, the doctor commanded. I can see the first head. With a primal scream that contained all her pain, rage, and hope, Danielle pushed. At 3:17 in the morning, Elijah Carter slipped into the world, his indignant wail filling the room seconds later. His sister, Zoe, followed 7 minutes after, smaller but with powerful lungs that announced her arrival forcefully. When the nurses placed the swaddled newborns in her arms, Danielle's exhaustion vanished, replaced by a love so fierce it took her breath away. Their tiny faces, still puffy from birth, bore unmistakable traces of Jackson. Elijah with his strong brow, Zoe with the distinctive Tate chin. "Hello, my fighters," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We made it this far together. Everything I do from now on is for you." A soft knock interrupted the moment. Professor Rivera stood in the doorway, a small gift bag in hand. "I hope you don't mind," she said, approaching cautiously. "The hospital called the emergency number you listed on your student information." Danielle looked up in surprise. She'd listed the college's main office, never expecting anyone to actually come. "They're beautiful," the professor said, gazing at the twins. "Do they have names?" "Elijah and Zoe," Danielle replied, then added softly, "Carter. Just Carter." Professor Rivera nodded, understanding the deliberate omission of any paternal surname. "The faculty took up a collection," she said, placing the gift bag on the bedside table. "Nothing fancy, just some essentials." The unexpected kindness broke through Danielle's carefully maintained composure. For the first time since Jackson's rejection, she allowed herself to truly cry, shoulders shaking with the release. The professor simply sat beside her, a steady presence until the storm passed. "I have to take my final exam," Danielle said suddenly, wiping her eyes. "It's on Friday." Professor Rivera stared at her in disbelief. "You just had twins." "I can't lose my scholarship. I need this degree." After a moment's consideration, the professor pulled out her phone. "I'll speak with administration. Perhaps we can arrange something alternative." 2 days later, still in her hospital bed, Danielle completed her business fundamentals final exam while Elijah nursed at her breast and Zoe slept in a bassinet beside her. The accommodating professor supervised, occasionally offering to hold a baby so Danielle could write more comfortably. When it was over, Professor Rivera collected the papers with a smile. "Remarkable," she said simply. 1 week later, Danielle moved into subsidized housing she'd qualified for as a student parent, a tiny one-bedroom apartment that felt like a palace after her rented room. The scholarship covered childcare at the college's facility, allowing her to attend classes while the twins were cared for nearby. The reality of raising newborn twins while pursuing a degree and working part-time was even more brutal than Danielle had anticipated. Nights became an endless cycle of feedings, diaper changes, and soothing cries, often while reviewing textbooks propped against a nursing pillow. Days were a carefully choreographed dance of childcare drop-offs, classes, work-study hours, and brief visits to the childcare center to nurse between lectures. "You look exhausted," observed Dr. Helena Rivera, no longer just her professor but now something of a mentor. One afternoon when she found Danielle dozing in the computer lab, Elijah asleep in a carrier on her chest while she typed a paper one-handed. "I'm fine," Danielle insisted automatically. Dr. Rivera placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're not fine, but you're extraordinary. I've been teaching for 20 years, and I've never seen determination like yours." That Sunday, Danielle was startled by a knock at her apartment door. Opening it cautiously, she found Dr. Rivera standing there with several grocery bags and a large box of diapers. "I hope I'm not intruding," the professor said, "but I thought you could use some help." Danielle's pride warred briefly with necessity before she stepped aside to let her in. "I saw your project proposal for the technology seminar," Dr. Rivera said as she unpacked groceries. "Your algorithm for energy efficiency optimization is remarkable. Have you considered specializing in sustainable technology?" Over the following months, with Dr. Rivera's guidance, Danielle discovered her natural aptitude for technology and innovation. Her first simple algorithm for optimizing energy usage won a small departmental competition, the modest prize money allowing her to reduce her weekend work hours. As the twins reached their first birthday, their personalities emerged distinctly. Elijah observant and methodical, Zoe vibrant and expressive. Danielle documented every milestone in a journal, capturing first smiles, first words, first steps. "Dada?" Elijah questioned one evening, pointing at a man on television. Danielle's heart constricted. "No, sweetheart, just Mama. We have each other, and that's all we need." On a crisp spring day when the twins were 18 months old, Danielle was pushing their second-hand stroller through Midtown when she froze. Across the street stood Jackson Tate, checking his watch outside the entrance to Tiffany's. Even from a distance, she could see he hadn't changed. Still impeccably dressed, still radiating entitled confidence. She ducked behind a newspaper stand, heart pounding, watching as he entered the jewelry store. Probably shopping for his wife, she realized, remembering vaguely that the society wedding had been featured in papers months ago. Danielle looked down at her own hands, calloused from work and childcare, then at her children playing happily in their worn stroller. Her simple cotton dress from a thrift store was a far cry from her previous life's aspirations. Yet something had fundamentally shifted inside her. The sight of Jackson no longer brought pain, just resolve. Back in their small apartment that evening, watching her children sleep peacefully in their shared crib, Danielle whispered a renewed promise. "One day we'll have more than he ever dreamed of giving us." The young mother who hid to avoid being seen by the man who rejected her couldn't imagine that in just over a decade it would be him desperately trying to enter her field of vision. 3 years had transformed Danielle's world. The twins had grown from helpless newborns into curious, chattering toddlers, and Danielle herself had evolved from a desperate single mother into something unexpected, a promising scholar. The letter in her hands, embossed with Columbia University's prestigious seal, confirmed what had once seemed impossible. "Full scholarship," she whispered, sitting on the edge of her bed in the small but tidy apartment she'd maintained since the twins' birth. "We're going to Columbia." Elijah, now 3 years old with a serious expression that sometimes startled strangers, looked up from his building blocks. "Columbia," he repeated carefully, already showing a precocious ability with words. "Is it far?" asked Zoe, Jackson's blue eyes staring out from her delicate face, her dark curls bouncing as she twirled in a makeshift dance. "Not too far," Danielle answered, pulling both children into her arms. "And it's going to change everything." The transition to Columbia proved as challenging as Danielle had expected. Walking across the manicured campus that first day, she felt the weight of difference between herself and the other students. Most younger, most from privileged backgrounds, most unburdened by responsibilities beyond their studies. "You're in engineering systems and business administration?" asked a preppy sophomore during orientation, eyebrows raised skeptically as he spotted the twins holding her hands. "That's ambitious. I like a challenge," Danielle replied simply, guiding her children toward the university's daycare facility. The Columbia Child Care Center was a revelation. Bright, well-staffed, educational. The scholarship covered partial childcare costs, a blessing Danielle never took for granted. Each morning she'd drop off Elijah and Zoe, pressing kisses to their foreheads before hurrying across campus to her first class. "Mama has to learn lots of things so we can have a better life," she explained when Zoe clung to her leg one difficult morning. "I'll be back before you know it." Her apartment in Morningside Heights was tiny. A converted studio with a pull-out couch for her and a small bedroom that barely fit the twins' toddler beds. But its walls told the story of their evolving life, children's artwork, academic calendars, and increasingly complex diagrams and flowcharts for Danielle's projects. "You've transformed this algorithm beyond what I expected," Professor Garcia commented during office hours, reviewing Danielle's latest work on energy optimization systems. "This isn't just theoretical. This could have significant commercial applications." Danielle glanced at her watch, always conscious of the daycare's closing time. I was thinking about real-world implementation while cleaning the apartment last night. If we could reduce energy costs in residential buildings by even 15%. Speaking of real-world applications, the professor interrupted. Professor Williams mentioned you to me. The Entrepreneurship Incubator is accepting applications for next semester. Your work would be perfect. As she hurried across campus to collect the twins, Danielle's mind raced with possibilities. The Entrepreneurship Incubator was Columbia's prestigious program for business-oriented innovations, a launching pad for startups that attracted venture capitalists and angel investors. That night, after tucking the children into bed, she spread her notes across the kitchen table, the single lamp casting long shadows as she worked until her eyes burned. This wasn't just an academic exercise anymore. This could be their future. The twins' development continued to astonish her. Elijah, not yet 4, could already count to 100 and showed an uncanny ability to recognize patterns. One morning, Danielle found him arranging his breakfast cereal in perfect geometric shapes. "Triangle," he explained seriously. "Hexagon, octagon." Zoe's talents manifested differently, humming complex melodies after hearing them once, dancing with natural rhythm, singing with perfect pitch. "That child has a gift," remarked her daycare teacher after witnessing Zoe recite a song in its entirety after hearing it just once. These moments of maternal pride were balanced by crushing self-doubt. Many nights, Danielle would collapse into bed, exhausted from juggling coursework, her part-time research assistantship, and parenting, wondering if she was attempting the impossible. "You don't look like our other TAs," a freshman remarked bluntly during the technical lab Danielle supervised to earn extra income. "What does a teaching assistant look like?" she countered, helping him correct his coding error. "Not like a mom," he mumbled, embarrassed. Such moments were frequent during her first semester at Columbia. Danielle felt perpetually out of place, too old among the undergraduates, too inexperienced among the graduate students, too financially constrained among the wealthy. But gradually, as her academic excellence became apparent, attitudes shifted. "Could you explain the distributed systems concept again?" asked a classmate who had previously ignored her. "You made it much clearer than the professor." By the time she presented her energy optimization project to the Entrepreneurship Incubator Selection Committee 6 months later, something fundamental had changed. Standing before a panel of professors and industry experts, Danielle spoke with quiet confidence, her earlier insecurities transformed into determination. "My algorithm reduces building energy consumption by targeting inefficiencies in HVAC systems, lighting, and appliance usage," she explained, advancing through her meticulously prepared slides. "Initial simulations show potential savings of 22% in residential buildings and 28% in commercial spaces." Professor Williams, seated at the end of the panel, nodded approvingly. Another panelist, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s wearing an impeccably tailored suit, leaned forward with interest. "Very impressive, Ms. Carter. But what makes this different from other energy management systems currently on the market?" Danielle met her gaze steadily. "Current systems rely on preset parameters. Mine uses machine learning to continuously adapt to usage patterns, weather variations, and even the building's thermal properties as they change over time. It's essentially alive, growing smarter with each day of operation." After the presentation, as Danielle gathered her materials, the well-dressed woman approached. "Margaret Chen," she introduced herself, extending a business card. "I'd like to discuss your project further." Margaret Chen, Danielle soon discovered, wasn't just another business professor. She was a successful tech entrepreneur turned angel investor, known for backing women-led startups. "Your algorithm is impressive," Margaret said over coffee the following week, "but what truly interests me is you. I've mentored dozens of entrepreneurs, and the technology is only half the equation. The person behind it determines success or failure." Danielle shifted uncomfortably. "I'm still learning. "Tell me about yourself," Margaret pressed. "Not your academic record, I've seen that. Tell me what drives you." Hesitantly, Danielle shared a carefully edited version of her story. Single motherhood, her struggle through community college, her determination to build a better life. She omitted Jackson's name and the cruelty of his rejection, but the emotional truth resonated clearly. "Remarkable," Margaret said when she finished. "And your children? They must be extraordinary too." "They are," Danielle smiled, her entire face transforming. "Elijah is already doing simple addition. Zoe sings perfectly in pitch." Later that evening, while researching potential applications for her algorithm, Danielle's attention was caught by a business magazine left in the university library. Jackson's face stared from the page, accompanying an article titled, "Tate Marriage in Crisis, Infidelity Rumors Rock Industry Power Couple." For a moment she stared at his image, still handsome, still privileged, but now with lines of dissatisfaction etched around his mouth. The article detailed his marriage's public deterioration amid rumors he'd been unfaithful with a series of models and assistants. Danielle closed the magazine, surprised by her own indifference. 3 years ago, such news might have brought vindication or pain. Now it barely registered emotionally. She had built a life that no longer revolved around his absence. The following day, she took the twins to a small park near their apartment, watching as they played on the swings. Elijah calculated the arc of his swing with serious concentration, while Zoe sang improvised songs about clouds and birds. Danielle's phone rang, an unknown number. "Ms. Carter? Margaret Chen. I've been thinking about your project." The investor's voice was brisk, decisive. "I'd like to offer you seed funding." Danielle's hand tightened on the phone. "Seed funding?" $50,000 to develop a working prototype and establish your company. With conditions, of course. You must complete your degree, and I'll want regular progress reports. That evening, Danielle sat the twins down for a special talk, their little faces solemn as they sensed the importance of the moment. "Mama's going to start a business," she explained, struggling to translate complex concepts into 3-year-old terms. "Like in the stories we read about people who build important things." "Will it make people happy?" Zoe asked, always concerned with emotions. "I hope so, sweetheart. It will help save energy. That's good for everyone." "What will you call it?" Elijah wanted to know, practical even in toddlerhood. Danielle had been considering this question since Margaret's call. The name needed to represent transformation, resilience, rebirth. "Phoenix Innovations," she told them, pulling both children onto her lap. "A phoenix is a magical bird that rises from ashes to become something beautiful and powerful, just like us." The modest check of $50,000 that Danielle held with trembling hands would be just the first seed of the billion-dollar empire that would one day make Jackson Tate beg for a chance at redemption. The small check from Margaret Chen transformed not just Danielle's financial situation, but her entire mindset. No longer was she merely a struggling student mother. She was now an entrepreneur, a founder, a CEO. The transition felt both terrifying and exhilarating as she stood at Columbia's graduation ceremony 2 years later, diploma in hand, the twins waving enthusiastically from the audience where they sat with Dr. Rivera. "Danielle Carter, Engineering Systems and Business Administration summa cum laude," announced the dean as she crossed the stage. From the crowd, 5-year-old Zoe's voice rang out clearly, "That's my mama!" The audience chuckled warmly, and Danielle felt her cheeks flush with pride rather than embarrassment. After the ceremony, she hugged her children tightly, their small bodies warm against her graduation gown. "Did you see, Mama?" "I didn't wiggle even once," Elijah said seriously, adjusting his small glasses that made him look like a miniature professor. "You both were perfect," she assured them, catching Dr. Rivera's eye over their heads. The professor who had become her mentor and friend smiled knowingly. They both recognized this moment as not just an academic achievement, but a victory against nearly impossible odds. 1 week later, Danielle unlocked the door to Phoenix Innovation's first official headquarters, a rented desk in a crowded co-working space in the Bronx. The space buzzed with young entrepreneurs, most working on flashy apps or social media platforms. Danielle noticed immediately that she was the only woman on the entire floor. "You're the energy algorithm lady, right?" asked a 20-something man with a well-groomed beard and expensive sneakers. "Cool to have some diversity here. This place is a total brofest." Danielle smiled politely as she arranged her modest workspace, setting up the refurbished laptop she'd purchased with part of Margaret's investment. Diversity. The word felt like a label, a way to categorize her as something other than simply a founder with a viable business concept. The first months of Phoenix were a study in persistence. Danielle spent countless hours refining her algorithm, developing a prototype, and crafting a business plan that would appeal to potential clients. Margaret's guidance proved invaluable, but the day-to-day execution fell entirely on Danielle's shoulders. Her first potential investor meeting was a jarring reminder of the biases she would face. The venture capitalist, a silver-haired man in his 50s, had seemed enthusiastic about her technology until their face-to-face meeting. "Impressive work," he acknowledged, leaning back in his chair. "But I have to ask, how do you manage a startup while being a single mother? Isn't that complicated?" Danielle maintained her composure, though she felt a familiar heat rising in her chest. "Would you ask a male founder with children the same question?" The man's momentary discomfort revealed the answer. The meeting ended cordially, but the term sheet never materialized. At home, the demands were equally challenging. Night after night, Danielle helped the twins with their increasingly advanced schoolwork, then settled down to her own work once they were asleep, often coding until the early hours of morning. "Ms. Carter, could we speak privately?" asked Mrs. Abernathy, the twins' kindergarten teacher, during a parent-teacher conference. Danielle's heart sank, fearing behavior problems or academic issues. Instead, the teacher slid several assessment sheets across the desk. "Your children have exceptional abilities. Elijah's mathematical reasoning is at a third-grade level, minimum, and Zoe's musical aptitude is remarkable. She's been teaching the other children songs she creates." "They're quick learners," Danielle acknowledged cautiously. "They're gifted," Mrs. Abernathy corrected firmly. "Have you considered programs for exceptionally talented children? There are scholarships available." That conversation led to a cascade of assessments, applications, and eventually special enrichment programs. Suddenly, Danielle found herself navigating not just the challenges of entrepreneurship, but also the complex world of raising gifted children. 6 months after founding Phoenix, Danielle secured her first real client, a small solar energy cooperative in Brooklyn that was willing to test her system in their community power project. The morning of the installation, Danielle arrived personally, toolbox in hand, determined to oversee every aspect of the implementation. "You're the developer?" asked the cooperative's technical director, surprise evident in his voice as he took in her small frame and determination. "I'm the founder, developer, and installer," she confirmed, already assessing the control systems. "Let's get started." For 3 days, Danielle worked alongside the cooperative's engineers, installing sensors, configuring software, and fine-tuning the system. She slept barely 4 hours each night, rushing home to spend time with the twins before returning to the site at dawn. On the 4th day, they activated the system. Real-time data began flowing across the monitoring screens, showing immediate efficiency improvements. 22% reduction in the first hour, the technical director announced, his earlier skepticism replaced with undisguised admiration. "If this holds, it's revolutionary." The success of the Brooklyn project provided Phoenix with crucial validation data and led to 2 additional small contracts. Though still far from profitable, the company had moved from theoretical to operational, a critical milestone for any startup. In May, Danielle presented Phoenix Innovations at the Sustainable Energy Solutions Fair, a modest regional event that attracted local businesses and a handful of industry insiders. Her booth was simple compared to the elaborate displays of larger companies, just a laptop running simulation models and a poster board explaining the technology. "So you're saying this could be retrofitted to existing buildings?" asked an elderly man who had been examining her display for several minutes. "Absolutely," Danielle confirmed. "The system is designed to integrate with any existing infrastructure, which dramatically reduces implementation costs." The man nodded thoughtfully before introducing himself as the head of the New York State Energy Innovation Committee. 3 weeks later, Phoenix Innovations received the fair's Emerging Innovation Award and a feature in a respected industry newsletter. "Ex-waitress revolutionizes energy sector," read the headline of the article, which detailed Danielle's journey from community college to startup founder. She represents a new generation of innovators who approach problems from non-traditional perspectives, Margaret was quoted saying. "Phoenix Innovations isn't just about technology, it's about reimagining how we interact with our environment." The publicity brought a meeting with potential investors, larger players than Phoenix had attracted previously. Seated in Margaret's elegant office, Danielle presented her growth strategy with newfound confidence, highlighting the success metrics from the Brooklyn project. "We're projecting expansion to 5 additional sites this year, with revenue reaching break-even by Q4, she explained, advancing through her carefully prepared slides. The investors nodded appreciatively, but Danielle noticed their gaze occasionally drifting to the window, where Elijah and Zoe were visible in Margaret's office lounge, working quietly on their advanced homework under the supervision of a college student Danielle had hired as an occasional caregiver. "You've accomplished a remarkable amount while raising 2 children alone," observed one investor, a woman in her 60s. "That speaks to your commitment." It was the first time someone had framed her motherhood as an asset rather than a liability in the business context. On a rare Saturday without work commitments, Danielle took the twins to Coney Island, a special treat to celebrate their recent acceptance into an accelerated learning program. As Elijah calculated the physics of the roller coaster and Zoe danced to the carnival music, Danielle allowed herself a moment of pure maternal joy. That's when she saw them, Jackson and his wife, standing near a concession stand. His face was flushed with anger as he gesticulatively wildly, while his elegantly dressed wife dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, a massive diamond ring catching the sunlight. Danielle instinctively drew the children closer, turning away before Jackson could notice them. The brief glimpse had shown her a man unraveling, successful on paper perhaps, but clearly unhappy in the life he had chosen. On the subway ride home, with Elijah and Zoe dozing against her shoulders, Danielle reflected on the strange encounter. There had been a time when seeing Jackson would have devastated her, when his rejection defined her sense of self. Now, he seemed like a character from a book she had read long ago, recognizable but no longer relevant to her story. "Are we a real family even without a dad?" Zoe had asked just the previous week, after a classmate's questions had prompted new curiosity. Danielle had gathered both children close. "We 3 are a complete team. We don't need anyone else." The man who shouted at his wife in the amusement park had no idea that in 7 years he would be begging for 5 minutes of attention from the woman he once considered disposable. 5 years passed like the turning pages of a book Danielle was writing with her own hands. The Phoenix Innovations that had begun as a single rented desk in a crowded co-working space now occupied an entire floor in a sleek midtown Manhattan office building. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the company's logo, a stylized bird rising from flames rendered in brushed metal against the reception wall. "The Tokyo team is online too," announced Danielle's assistant as she strode through the main workspace. At 34, Danielle Carter carried herself with the quiet confidence of a woman who had built something substantial from nothing. Her simple but elegant business attire had replaced the threadbare clothes of her waitressing days, though she still favored practical heels over the towering stilettos preferred by many female executives. "I'll take it in the conference room," she replied, nodding toward the glass-enclosed space where her executive team was already assembling for their weekly strategy meeting. 200 employees now depended on Phoenix, with offices in Chicago and San Francisco beyond their New York headquarters. Inside the conference room, Danielle activated the video call, revealing a team of engineers in Tokyo. "Good evening, Tanaka-san," she greeted, mindful of the time difference. "How are the implementation tests proceeding?" As the Japanese team leader detailed their progress on Phoenix's first Asian project, Danielle felt a momentary sense of disbelief. In 5 short years, her algorithm had evolved from a promising prototype to a globally recognized solution for sustainable energy management, with projects across 12 states and now expanding internationally. After the call, she turned to her leadership team. "The Japanese market represents our first true global test. Their energy efficiency standards are already among the world's highest. If we succeed there, Europe will follow." Marcus Chen, Margaret's nephew and Phoenix's chief operating officer, nodded approvingly. "The data from the Stockholm proposal looks promising too. We could be in 4 European countries by this time next year." The meeting continued with reports from various departments. Research and Development was finalizing version 3.0 of their core algorithm. Human Resources had completed the onboarding process for 30 new employees. Marketing was preparing for the upcoming Sustainable Energy Conference in Berlin. This was Danielle's world now: quarterly projections, expansion strategies, and technology roadmaps. Yet even as she directed this growing enterprise, her thoughts were never far from the 2 people who remained the center of her universe. "I'll need to leave early today," she reminded her team as the meeting concluded. "Zoe has a recital at 4. Later that afternoon, Danielle slipped into an auditorium seat at the Manhattan School for Gifted Children, where both twins had earned full scholarships 3 years earlier. On stage, 10-year-old Zoe stood with her violin, face composed in serene concentration before drawing her bow across the strings. The opening notes of Vivaldi's Summer filled the hall, played with a technical precision and emotional depth that belied her age. In the audience, proud parents recorded performances on expensive phones, but none looked as fiercely proud as Danielle, who knew exactly what it had taken to reach this moment. Not just Zoe's natural talent and diligent practice, but years of financial gymnastics to afford the second-hand violin that preceded the instrument she now played, countless late nights helping with homework after exhausting workdays, and the constant challenge of being both mother and father to 2 exceptional children. The next morning found Danielle in another school building, this time watching Elijah present his mathematics project to a panel of university professors who had been invited to evaluate the school's advanced students. "My algorithm predicts prime number distributions with 17% greater accuracy than existing models," explained Elijah, pointing to complex equations that would challenge most adults. At 10, he already showed the analytical precision and quiet confidence that would one day make him a formidable presence in whatever field he chose. "Have you considered the applications in cryptography?" asked one impressed professor. "Yes, sir. That's addressed on page 12 of my report," Elijah replied, pushing his glasses up with one finger in a gesture reminiscent of his mother. Watching him, Danielle felt that familiar mixture of pride and melancholy. Both children had inherited Jackson's striking blue eyes and certain facial features, creating occasional painful echoes of the man who had rejected them before birth. Back at Phoenix headquarters, Danielle was reviewing the quarterly financial reports when her phone buzzed with a notification. Forbes 30 Under 40, Entrepreneurs Reshaping America, featured a profile of her, alongside tech giants and innovation leaders. The article highlighted Phoenix's groundbreaking work and briefly mentioned her journey from single mother working multiple jobs to CEO of a company valued at over $400 million. "They want to do a full feature," said Amara, Phoenix's PR director, appearing in Danielle's doorway with obvious excitement. "Cover story potential." "I'll consider it," Danielle replied cautiously. She had always been selective about media exposure, particularly regarding the twins. The Forbes profile mentioned them only as her two children, with no names or photographs, exactly as she preferred. That evening in their Upper East Side apartment, spacious and comfortable, though modest compared to what she could afford, Danielle prepared dinner while the twins set the table. Their home reflected their values: bookshelves overflowing with diverse titles, a piano for Zoe, a dedicated study area for Elijah, family photographs documenting their journey, but nothing ostentatious or excessive. "Mom, did you see the email from Mr. Abrams?" Elijah asked, carefully arranging forks with mathematical precision. "He thinks I should apply to the International Mathematics Olympiad. And Mrs. Winters wants me to audition for the New York Youth Symphony," added Zoe, placing water glasses at perfect intervals. "They've never had someone my age before." "I saw both emails," Danielle confirmed, serving the healthy meal she'd prepared despite her exhaustion. "We'll discuss the logistics this weekend." Their dinner conversation flowed easily from school projects to scientific discoveries to music theory, topics that would seem precocious for most 10-year-olds but were standard fare in the Carter household. Danielle had always spoken to her children as intellectual equals, a respect that had fostered both their academic excellence and emotional maturity. After dinner, while the twins completed homework, Danielle retreated to her home office to review a news alert that had appeared on her phone earlier. "Tate Industries faces shareholder revolt after failed Middle East project," read the headline, accompanied by a photograph of Jackson looking haggard as he entered a corporate building. The article detailed how Tate Industries had lost hundreds of millions on an ill-conceived development in Dubai, with shareholders questioning Jackson's leadership and rumors of forced asset sales to cover mounting debts. She scrolled through the piece with detached interest, feeling neither satisfaction nor sympathy at his apparent downfall. The following week, Phoenix hosted a delegation from one of America's largest energy conglomerates. Their CEO, a veteran industry player, made no attempt to hide the purpose of their visit. $800 million, he stated bluntly after presentations had concluded. Clean offer, minimal regulatory hurdles, retention packages for key staff. He smiled confidently. "You've built something impressive, Ms. Carter, but integration with our infrastructure would take Phoenix to places you can't reach independently." Danielle regarded him steadily, aware of her executive team's tense anticipation. $800 million was a staggering sum, enough to secure her family's future for generations, enough to fund any dream or project she might imagine. "Phoenix isn't for sale," she replied with quiet firmness. "But we're open to partnership discussions that maintain our operational independence." Later, in Margaret's elegant townhouse over tea, her mentor and now friend questioned the decision. $800 million is life-changing money, Danielle. Many founders would leap at such an exit opportunity. "It's not about the money," Danielle explained, watching evening shadows lengthen across Margaret's antique carpet. "Phoenix is just beginning its real mission. We're expanding into developing nations next year, creating sustainable infrastructure where it's needed most." Margaret studied her protégé with knowing eyes. "There's more to it than that." Danielle nodded slowly. "The twins will inherit Phoenix someday. I'm building this not just for myself, but for them, a legacy of creation rather than rejection." That night, after explaining her decision to Elijah and Zoe, who had responded with characteristic thoughtfulness, Danielle stood at her office window, gazing across the Manhattan skyline. The Tate Industries building was visible in the distance, its illuminated logo a reminder of where her journey had begun. "Not yet," she whispered to herself, thinking of the acquisition offer and all it represented. "Our moment will come." The woman who refused $800 million wasn't merely being obstinate. She was preparing the ground for a confrontation that would make her initial rejection seem insignificant in comparison. The red dress that Danielle chose for the gala was not merely a fashion statement. It was a declaration of war for the battle that would redefine both their lives. 3 years had passed since she'd refused the $800 million acquisition offer, and Phoenix Innovations had transformed from a promising startup into a global powerhouse. The company now occupied a striking, sustainable skyscraper in downtown Manhattan, its innovative design featuring vertical gardens, solar panels, and the Phoenix name emblazoned at the top in illuminated letters visible across the skyline. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office on the 50th floor, Danielle could see the Tate Industries building just 2 blocks away, a proximity that felt both ironic and inevitable. At 37, she had become a force in the business world, recognized not just for Phoenix's revolutionary technology, but for her leadership philosophy that prioritized sustainability and social responsibility. The Singapore implementation exceeded projections by 17%, announced Raj, her chief technology officer, during the morning's executive meeting. "That's our best international launch to date." Danielle nodded approvingly. "That brings us to 20 countries now. The Australian contract should make 21 by quarter's end." With 800 employees worldwide and a valuation that had recently crossed the $3 billion mark, Phoenix represented everything she had once dreamed of while scrubbing floors and serving coffee. More importantly, it stood as living proof against Jackson's cruel prediction that she would never survive, let alone thrive. After the meeting, her assistant appeared at the door. "The mayor's office is on line 1. She says it's important." Danielle's relationship with New York's first female mayor had evolved from professional respect to genuine friendship over the past 2 years, as Phoenix partnered with the city on ambitious green infrastructure projects. "Madam Mayor," Danielle greeted warmly, "what can I do for you?" "I'm calling about the East Harlem initiative," the mayor replied. "The preliminary data is outstanding. Energy costs down 32% in the pilot buildings, with corresponding reductions in emissions." "The community installation team deserves most of the credit," Danielle noted. "Hiring and training locally has improved both implementation and maintenance. That's exactly why I'd like you to present at next week's Sustainable Cities Conference. Your approach combines technological innovation with social impact in ways other companies haven't matched." After scheduling the presentation, Danielle checked her watch. Just enough time to review the quarterly reports before picking up Elijah for his doctor's appointment. At 13, both twins had blossomed into remarkable adolescents, each displaying extraordinary talents that sometimes left even Danielle astonished. "Mom, did you see this?" Elijah burst into her office later that afternoon, waving an envelope emblazoned with Harvard's crimson logo. His blue eyes, so unnervingly like Jackson's, sparkled with excitement behind his glasses. Danielle set aside the report she'd been reviewing. "Is that what I think it is? They want me to attend their Advanced Mathematics Symposium next month. Professor Lewin says they've never invited someone my age before." The pride that swelled in Danielle's chest was tempered by the bittersweet knowledge that another milestone would pass without the twins' father witnessing their exceptional achievements. Not that Jackson deserved to share in their triumphs. His absence had been his choice. "That's incredible, sweetheart. We'll need to coordinate with Zoe's schedule. Where is she, by the way?" "Still at orchestra rehearsal. She said she'd meet us directly at the Met tonight." Elijah adjusted his glasses, a gesture reminiscent of his earlier childhood. "Do you really have to go to this ball? We could stay home and watch documentaries instead." Danielle smiled at her son's perpetual preference for quiet, intellectual pursuits over social gatherings. The Met Charity Ball is the most important social event of the year, and Phoenix is one of the main sponsors this time. What she didn't add was that Tate Industries would also be present, as a minor sponsor, a reflection of how fortunes had shifted. Through business news and occasional society page glimpses, Danielle had followed Jackson's downward trajectory. His divorce after 10 years of marriage to oil heiress Catherine, the financial scandals that had rocked Tate Industries, the forced sale of significant company stakes to foreign investors. "Besides," she continued, "the mayor wants to introduce me to some important people. There are rumors about a possible Senate run." Later that evening, the Phoenix Innovations limousine pulled up to the Metropolitan Museum of Art's grand entrance. Photographers jostled for position as Danielle emerged, resplendent in a custom Valentino gown the color of flame. Elijah and Zoe followed, impeccably dressed in formal attire that highlighted their striking good looks and poise. Danielle Carter, the tech revolutionary who refused Silicon Valley's $2 billion buyout offer, announced the event's master of ceremonies as they entered the main hall. The assembled elite of Manhattan, politicians, celebrities, business leaders, applauded enthusiastically. This was the same social stratum that would have ignored Danielle completely 15 years earlier, or at best, expected her to refill their champagne glasses. The Phoenix Foundation's work in underserved communities is nothing short of transformative, gushed a well-known actress, catching Danielle's arm as she navigated through the crowd. My husband and I would love to discuss partnership opportunities. As Danielle engaged in the conversation, she didn't notice the man at the bar who spilled his whiskey upon seeing her. Jackson Tate, with premature gray at his temples and lines of strain around his once confident eyes, stared fixedly at the woman he had discarded 15 years before, and at the teenagers who unmistakably carried his facial features. The shock of recognition hit him physically. The waitress he had cruelly dismissed had transformed into this, a woman of substance and power moving effortlessly among the elite, commanding respect where he now struggled to maintain his position. And the children, his children. The boy's analytical gaze behind stylish glasses, the girl's graceful poise as she conversed with a Nobel laureate. Both teenagers exuded an intelligence and confidence that left him breathless with the magnitude of what he had thrown away. Jackson drained his glass, ordered another, and watched from a distance as Danielle was approached by the mayor, who guided her toward a group of influential politicians. He observed how people leaned in when she spoke, how her children were received not as accessories but as individuals of merit in their own right. Across the room, Zoe laughed at something the renowned violinist beside her had said, the sound carrying to Jackson's ears with painful clarity. The girl was his daughter, a daughter whose first words he had never heard, whose talents he had never nurtured. "Another scotch, sir?" asked the bartender, eyeing Jackson's shaking hand. "Double," he replied, never taking his eyes off the family that could have been his. By the time he had gathered enough liquid courage to approach, Danielle was engaged in conversation with the governor and several prominent business leaders. Jackson hovered at the periphery, straightening his tie, running a hand through his hair. Once his pride, now thinning and streaked with gray. "Excuse me," he finally managed, interrupting a discussion about renewable energy policy. "Danielle? Danielle Carter?" The conversation halted. Danielle turned slowly, her expression transforming from engaged animation to perfect, practiced neutrality as she met his eyes for the first time in 15 years. "Jackson Tate," she replied, her voice steady, though her heart raced beneath the composed exterior. "What a surprise!" The governor, sensing the sudden tension, tactfully steered the rest of the group away, leaving them momentarily alone in the crowded ballroom. "You look incredible," Jackson stammered, his eyes traveling from her elegant updo to her designer gown, so different from the timid waitress he had known. "I've heard about your success, but seeing you here..." "As CEO of Phoenix? Yes, we're having an extraordinary year," she replied with professional detachment. "We've just closed federal contracts for energy sustainability across government buildings, but I'm sure you follow the market." Jackson's gaze drifted to Elijah and Zoe, who were now engaged in conversation with a Supreme Court justice several feet away. "Those are my children," Danielle interrupted firmly. "Elijah has been accepted to Harvard at 13. Zoe recently returned from a European tour with the Junior Philharmonic." The color drained from Jackson's face as the full weight of his past decisions crashed down upon him. "They're extraordinary. They are everything to me," she responded simply. At that moment, they were interrupted by an announcement that dinner would be served. Danielle was escorted to the head table, while Jackson, now a less significant figure in the social hierarchy, was directed to a peripheral table. Throughout the meal, he couldn't take his eyes off the family that might have been his. He watched Danielle interact naturally with senators and CEOs, observed how her children demonstrated sophistication and intelligence far beyond their years. With each laugh, each confident gesture, each admiring glance she received, the magnitude of his error became more evident. The red dress that Danielle had chosen for the gala wasn't merely a fashion statement. It was a declaration of war for the battle that would redefine both their lives. The Metropolitan Museum's Great Hall glittered under the constellation of chandeliers, New York's elite moving through the space like celestial bodies in an elegant orbit. Cocktail hour was in full swing following dinner, the air perfumed with expensive fragrances and the subtle undercurrent of power. Danielle stood at the center of a small gathering of tech investors, her crimson Valentino gown drawing eyes from across the room. "Phoenix's approach to emerging markets is revolutionary," she explained, gesturing with her champagne flute. "Traditional energy companies see developing nations as risks. We see them as opportunities for sustainable growth from the ground up." The investors nodded appreciatively, but Danielle could feel eyes burning into her back. She didn't need to turn to know Jackson was watching her. Since their brief encounter before dinner, she had deliberately kept her distance, moving efficiently through the crowd, always surrounded by admirers and business contacts, a shield of success. "Ms. Carter, the mayor would like a word about the Washington Heights project," said a young aide, appearing at her elbow. Danielle excused herself from the investors and followed the aide to where the mayor stood conversing with the city's parks commissioner and a prominent real estate developer. They were discussing the innovative community-centered approach Phoenix had pioneered in disadvantaged neighborhoods. "The solar gardens have transformed those apartment buildings," the mayor was saying. "Energy costs down 40%, and the residents themselves maintain the systems." Danielle joined the conversation smoothly, but had barely begun explaining the technical aspects when she felt a presence at her shoulder. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up before she even heard his voice. "Danielle?" She turned slowly, meeting Jackson's gaze for the second time that evening. Up close, the changes in him were more apparent. The confident swagger replaced by a tentative posture, designer suit still impeccable but somehow failing to conceal an air of desperation. The mayor, sensing the tension, discreetly guided her group a few steps away, leaving Danielle and Jackson in a small island of privacy amid the crowded room. "Jackson Tate," Danielle acknowledged, her voice controlled despite the thundering of her heart. "Twice in one evening. To what do I owe the honor?" "You look incredible," he repeated, eyes traveling over her transformation. "The years have been kind to you." "Not the years," she corrected coolly. "Hard work, determination, and the love of my children." Jackson swallowed visibly. "I've been following your success with Phoenix. $3.4 billion valuation last quarter, wasn't it? Quite the achievement. As CEO of a publicly traded company, I'm sure you understand the fluctuations of market valuation," she responded, her tone professionally distant. Jackson's eyes drifted again to where Elijah and Zoe stood conversing with a Pulitzer Prize-winning author. "They're remarkable, Danielle. Truly remarkable." "Yes, they are." Her voice softened slightly when speaking of her children, the only genuine emotion she would allow herself to display before him. "They have my eyes," he observed quietly. "They have their own eyes," she corrected sharply. "Their own minds, their own hearts, their own futures." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them, 15 years of unspoken history expanding to fill the space. Jackson cleared his throat. "I made a terrible mistake, Danielle." She raised an eyebrow. "Which one?" "I recall several." Before he could respond, a waiter announced that dinner would be served momentarily. With perfect timing, Danielle was escorted to the head table by a board member of the Metropolitan Museum, leaving Jackson standing alone, his half-formed apology dying on his lips. The seating arrangement spoke volumes about their reversed fortunes. Danielle was placed at the central table with the mayor, 2 senators, and several cultural luminaries. Jackson found himself relegated to a peripheral table with minor donors and social climbers, the type of people he would have dismissed as inconsequential in his heyday. Throughout the meal, Jackson couldn't help but stare at what he had discarded. Danielle animated in conversation, respected and admired. Elijah earnestly discussing quantum computing with a renowned physicist. Zoe charming a Broadway composer with her insights on contemporary classical music. Each laugh, each gesture of respect directed toward them, each moment of their evident brilliance was a knife twisting in the wound of his monumental error. The family that could have been his had not only survived without him, they had thrived beyond anything he could have provided. After the main course, the mayor approached the podium for the evening's awards presentation. The room quieted as she adjusted the microphone. It is my great pleasure to announce this year's Entrepreneur of the Year award recipient, Danielle Carter, whose Phoenix Innovations has not only revolutionized the sustainable energy sector, but has created opportunities for hundreds of single mothers from Washington Heights to the South Bronx. Applause erupted as Danielle made her way to the stage, moving with the graceful confidence of a woman who belonged exactly where she was. Under the spotlight, her red dress blazed like a living flame. 15 years ago, she began, her voice clear and strong, I slept in a homeless shelter in the Bronx, pregnant with $20 in my pocket and 3 jobs that barely paid enough to eat. A hush fell over the ballroom. Even the waiters paused in their service. I was told that people like me were born to serve, never to belong. Jackson's eyes widened at hearing his own cruel words reflected back at him in this most public of forums. Today, Phoenix employs more than 1,200 people, is valued at $3.4 billion, and recently declined an acquisition offer of $5 billion. She paused, her eyes briefly finding Jackson's across the room. And half of our executive team consists of women who were once told they weren't enough. The ovation was deafening. Jackson remained frozen in his seat, witnessing the absolute triumph of the woman he had discarded. During the dessert course, as guests mingled between tables, Jackson finally gathered enough courage for another approach. Danielle was conversing with a group of investors when he joined their circle, nodding politely to the others before focusing on her. Your children are impressive like their father, I imagine, he murmured in a pathetic attempt to establish connection. The silence that followed was glacial. The investors exchanged uncomfortable glances. They don't have a father, Danielle replied with a calculated smile. They have a mother who did the work of 2, while building an empire now worth 3 times more than the company your father gave you as a gift. The men around them choked on their drinks, recognizing the direct hit at Tate Industries' precarious financial situation. Danielle, could we speak privately? Please. Jackson's voice was thick with emotion. We have nothing to discuss, Mr. Tate. They're my children too, he insisted, reaching out to touch Elijah's arm as the boy approached with a drink for his mother. It was the fatal mistake. Danielle stepped between them, her face transformed by a fury contained for 15 years. This man, she declared, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, abandoned 2 unborn babies and their mother on a winter night, saying we were a burden. Today, the 3 of us are worth more in the market than the entire Tate fortune. The entire hall seemed to have fallen silent. Elijah and Zoe stared in shock at the man before them, recognition slowly dawning on their faces. You are our biological father? Asked Zoe, her voice trembling. Jackson, tears welling in his eyes, nodded. I made the biggest mistake of my life. Please, if we could just… No, interrupted Danielle. You don't have that right. Not after 15 years. The tears in Jackson's eyes weren't of genuine remorse, but of belated realization of the magnitude of his loss. He watched helplessly as Danielle and her children were surrounded by admirers, investors, and influential politicians. The mayor approached again, smiling broadly. "New York needs more people like you in public service, Danielle. As a future Senate candidate, you would have my full support." Jackson, desperate, pulled out a business card and extended it toward Danielle. "Please, I just want a chance to know them, to be part of their lives." Danielle took the card, looked at it for a moment, then deliberately dropped it into her champagne glass. 15 years ago, you taught me the most valuable lesson of Wall Street. Recognize a losing investment and move on. I'm now applying that lesson to you, Mr. Tate." The photos of the business card floating in the champagne glass reached the tabloids the next morning, but the true consequences of that night would only begin to unfold when the sun rose over Manhattan. The photographs of the business card floating in the champagne glass circulated through social media before the night was over. By morning, they had been picked up by every tabloid in the city, each competing for the most sensational headline. The image, elegant, deliberate, devastating in its symbolism, captured perfectly the public's imagination. Here was a woman who had risen from nothing, rejecting the man who had once rejected her, now from a position of power that he could only dream of. Danielle ignored the notifications flooding her phone as she prepared breakfast for the twins the morning after the gala. The kitchen in their Upper East Side apartment was filled with morning light, the space designed for both functionality and warmth, so different from the cramped quarters where she had once struggled to feed them as infants. "The Post has a picture of you on the front page," Elijah announced, scrolling through his tablet. At 13, his analytical mind already processed information with remarkable clarity. The headline says, "Heiress Tate confronted by ex-lover billionaire, the abandonment that cost a fortune." Danielle set down plates of fruit and whole-grain waffles. The tabloids always exaggerate. "But it's true, isn't it?" Zoe asked quietly. "That man last night, he's really our biological father?" Danielle took a deep breath, setting aside her coffee cup. This was the conversation she had always known would come, though she had imagined it under different circumstances, planned, controlled, not forced by a public confrontation. "Yes," she confirmed, sitting down at the table with them. "Jackson Tate is your biological father. I'm sorry you discovered it that way. I always planned to tell you when you were ready." "Why didn't you tell us before?" Elijah's voice was steady. His blue eyes, so unnervingly like Jackson's, focused intently on her face. "Because he chose not to be part of our lives," she answered with simple honesty. "And because we built something wonderful, the three of us together, without needing him." Zoe, always more emotional than her brother, had tears gathering in her eyes. "Did he really say those terrible things about us? Before we were born?" Danielle reached across the table to take her daughter's hand. "Yes, sweetheart. But what he never understood is that his cruel words became our strength. Every time I faced an obstacle, I remembered the promise I made to you both before you were even born, that we would prove him wrong." The conversation was interrupted by the insistent buzz of the intercom. The security desk announced, "Mr. Jackson Tate requesting entry, Ms. Carter." The three Carters exchanged startled glances, surprised by his audacity after the previous night's humiliation. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you," Danielle told her children, recognizing their right to make this choice. "He is biologically part of you, and you have the right to know him if you wish." A moment of silence fell over the kitchen as the twins considered this crossroads. It was Elijah who spoke first, his voice carrying the precise, measured tone he used when solving complex equations. "We're not ready for that now. Maybe we never will be." Zoe nodded in agreement. "We need time. If he really cares, he'll respect that." Danielle instructed security to inform Jackson that her children did not wish to see him at present, but might reconsider in the future if he respected their space. Across town, in his considerably downsized Central Park West apartment, Jackson received the message with a mixture of frustration and desperation. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and bent business rivals to his will now found himself powerless in the face of a simple rejection. The irony wasn't lost on him. He who had so casually discarded Danielle and their unborn children now faced the same dismissal. His response was characteristic of someone unaccustomed to the word no. In the weeks that followed, Jackson launched a campaign to force a connection with the family he had abandoned. Expensive gifts arrived at their apartment: the latest technology for Elijah, a rare violin for Zoe, jewelry for Danielle, all returned unopened with polite but firm notes from Danielle's assistant. When gifts failed, Jackson attempted more direct approaches. He appeared outside Zoe's prestigious music school one afternoon, waiting by the entrance with a bouquet of roses. The school's security, recognizing him from photos Danielle had provided, escorted him from the premises before Zoe ever saw him. He tried business channels next, contacting mutual acquaintances to arrange meetings with Danielle under the pretext of potential partnerships between Phoenix and the struggling Tate Industries. Each request was professionally declined with the same response: "Ms. Carter's schedule does not permit additional meetings at this time." Desperation mounted with each failure. The man who had once dismissed Danielle as insignificant now found their positions completely reversed. Her empire expanded daily while his crumbled under mismanagement and scandal. The very name she had built, Phoenix, seemed a taunt, rising from the ashes of his rejection to soar beyond his reach. After a month of frustrated attempts, Jackson finally resorted to the written word. Not to Danielle, whose barriers seemed impenetrable, but to the twins themselves. The letter arrived on heavy cream stationery, Tate Industries' watermark visible when held to the light. Danielle recognized the handwriting on the envelope and briefly considered returning it unopened, but her respect for the twins' autonomy prevailed. She placed it on the coffee table when they returned from school. "It's from him," she said simply. "The decision to read it is entirely yours." The envelope remained untouched through dinner, a silent presence during their evening routines. Only after Elijah finished his advanced calculus homework and Zoe returned from her violin practice did they finally approach it together. "Should we?" Zoe asked her brother, always the more cautious of the two when emotions were involved. Elijah adjusted his glasses, a gesture reminiscent of his younger years. "Statistically speaking, understanding all variables improves decision-making outcomes." They opened the letter together, heads bent close as they read, "Dear Elijah and Zoe, I won't ask for forgiveness, as I know I don't deserve it. I only want you to know that the greatest mistake of my life wasn't just abandoning your mother, but losing the chance to witness the extraordinary people you've become. If someday you want to know the part of yourselves that comes from me, I'll be waiting. If not, I'll understand completely. Respectfully, Jackson Tate." The letter remained on the coffee table for days, neither rejected nor acknowledged, until finally Danielle asked her children what they wished to do. "Maybe someday," Zoe answered, revealing wisdom beyond her years. "But not now. We have Harvard and Juilliard waiting for us. We have you. We have our life." 6 months later, Phoenix Innovations completed the acquisition of Tate Industries' core assets. The once mighty conglomerate, weakened by years of mismanagement and Jackson's increasingly desperate attempts to save it, had finally succumbed to market realities. The final signing took place in the Phoenix boardroom, where Jackson and Danielle met for the last time, not as adversaries but as a desperate seller and a powerful buyer. "You've won everything I had," Jackson said quietly as he signed the documents transferring his family's company into her hands. Danielle observed him for a moment. There was no hatred in her gaze, only a tranquility that came from absolute certainty in her own worth. "It was never about having what was yours, Jackson. It was about building something you could never have given me." She closed the folder containing the contracts. "Do you know what the real lesson was that I learned that night on Park Avenue? that my value didn't depend on your validation. It never did. And the twins? He asked hesitantly. They know the door is open if they ever want to know you. The decision is theirs, not mine. As she left the boardroom, Danielle felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, not from the billion-dollar acquisition, nor from the poetic justice of now owning the company that had once symbolized her rejection. The true relief came from the realization that Jackson Tate no longer meant anything in her life. He wasn't even an antagonist worthy of her hatred. He was merely a closed chapter. That evening, in her office on the top floor of the newly renamed Phoenix Tate Tower, Danielle contemplated the illuminated city. Her phone rang. It was the mayor, confirming her formal support for the Senate campaign. "We're making the announcement next week," the mayor said. "Are you ready for this?" Danielle smiled, thinking of the journey that had brought her here, from the waitress with $20 in her pocket to potential United States Senator. "I was born ready," she answered simply. The headline, "Tate Heir Confronted by Billionaire Ex-Lover." The abandonment that cost a fortune splashed across the New York Post's front page the morning after the Met Gala, accompanied by a photograph of Danielle's elegant hand dropping Jackson's business card into her champagne. By noon, every major tabloid and business publication had picked up the story, each adding their own dramatic interpretation of the encounter that had captivated New York's elite social circles. In her spacious Tribeca apartment, Danielle closed her laptop, shutting out the media frenzy that had erupted overnight. The twins sat across from her at the breakfast table, their expressions a mixture of confusion, curiosity, and concern. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I never wanted you to find out about your biological father this way. I always planned to tell you when the time was right." "Why didn't you tell us before?" Elijah asked, his analytical mind seeking logical patterns in this emotional chaos. Danielle reached across the table, taking both their hands in hers. "Because he chose not to be part of our lives from the very beginning. And honestly, we built something wonderful together, just the three of us. I didn't want his shadow hanging over your accomplishments." "Did he really say those things?" Zoe's voice trembled slightly. "That we were burdens?" Danielle nodded, her expression softening. "Yes, but what he never understood was that his cruelty became our strength. Every time we faced an obstacle, I remembered my promise to prove him wrong about us." The doorman's call interrupted their conversation. "Ms. Carter, there's a Mr. Tate in the lobby insisting on seeing you." The three exchanged startled glances at Jackson's audacity. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you," Danielle told her children. "He is biologically connected to you. You have the right to know him if you wish." After a moment of thoughtful silence, Elijah spoke first. "We're not ready. Perhaps someday, but not now." "We need time," Zoe agreed. "If he truly cares, he'll respect that." Danielle instructed the doorman to send Jackson away with the message that the children needed space and time. As the elevator doors closed on Jackson's disbelieving face, the social media explosion had already begun. Phoenix Rising and Tom Tate's tumble became trending topics as the public devoured the story of the abandoned waitress who had transformed herself into a billionaire while her former lover's empire crumbled. For Jackson, the public humiliation was merely the beginning. The morning after the gala, he arrived at Tate Industries headquarters to find the boardroom already filled with grim-faced executives and major shareholders. "This situation has become untenable, Jackson," announced Vernon Blackwell, the lead independent director. "The company's reputation was already precarious. Now this scandal—" "It's a personal matter," Jackson protested weakly. "Not anymore," countered Blackwell, sliding a tablet across the table displaying dozens of headlines. "Your position has become unsustainable. The board is requesting your immediate resignation." That afternoon, a brief press release announced Jackson's decision to step down to pursue personal interests, a transparent corporate euphemism that fooled no one. The devastating news continued when his fiancée, Boston socialite Elizabeth Cavendish, released a statement through her publicist. In light of recent revelations, I cannot in good conscience continue my relationship with Mr. Tate. His past actions demonstrate a character incompatible with my values and standards. One by one, the pillars of Jackson's carefully constructed life crumbled. Private clubs quietly revoked his membership. Charity boards requested his resignation. Former friends suddenly became unavailable for dinner. Meanwhile, Danielle's star continued to rise. The Phoenix Foundation announced an expansion of its program supporting single mothers in technology careers, generating a wave of positive press. Forbes published a feature titled "The Phoenix Effect: How Danielle Carter Rebuilt American Energy," with a stunning cover portrait of her standing before the Phoenix-branded skyscraper. In his increasingly empty Central Park West apartment, Jackson watched the coverage with a mixture of regret and desperation. The man who had once dismissed Danielle as insignificant now found himself obsessively following her every move, searching for some way to reinsert himself into the narrative of her success. His increasingly frantic attempts to connect with the twins continued over the following weeks. Expensive gifts arrived at their door, the latest technology for Elijah, a rare antique violin for Zoe, all returned unopened. He appeared outside Zoe's music school one afternoon, only to be escorted away by security before she saw him. He attempted to leverage business connections to arrange meetings with Danielle, each request professionally declined. After a month of rejections, Jackson finally wrote a letter, not to Danielle, whose barriers seemed impenetrable, but to the twins themselves. The carefully crafted note acknowledged his terrible mistake without asking for forgiveness, offering a chance for future connection if they ever desired it, while respecting their right to refuse. The letter sat on the Carter family coffee table for days, neither rejected nor acknowledged, until finally Danielle asked her children what they wished to do. "Maybe someday," Zoe answered thoughtfully, "but not now. We have Harvard and Juilliard waiting. We have you. We have our life." As Tate Industries continued its downward spiral, Phoenix Innovations soared. Danielle expanded the company's reach to 21 countries, the sustainable energy solutions revolutionizing communities from Singapore to Santiago. The contrast between the two companies became a business school case study in visionary leadership versus inherited entitlement. 6 months after the Met Gala confrontation, when Tate Industries' stock hit an all-time low, Phoenix Innovations announced its intention to acquire the company's core energy assets. The business world watched in astonishment as Danielle Carter prepared to purchase the remains of the empire that had once symbolized her rejection. On the day of the signing, Danielle entered the Phoenix boardroom to find Jackson already seated, looking older than his years. The arrogant young heir had been replaced by a man humbled by his own failures, his designer suit hanging slightly loose on his frame, as if he had physically diminished along with his fortunes. "The final documents are ready," announced Phoenix's lead counsel, placing the acquisition agreement before them. As Jackson signed away his family legacy, he looked up at Danielle with tears in his eyes. "You've gotten everything I had." Danielle observed him calmly, no hatred in her expression, only the tranquility of someone who had moved beyond the need for vengeance. "It was never about having what was yours, Jackson. It was about building something you could never have given me." She closed the folder containing the contracts. "The real lesson I learned that night on Park Avenue was that my value didn't depend on your validation. It never did." "And the twins?" he asked hesitantly. "They know the door is open if they ever want to know you. The decision is theirs, not mine." As Danielle left the boardroom, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, not from the billion-dollar acquisition, nor from the poetic justice of now owning the company that had once symbolized her rejection. The true relief came from the realization that Jackson Tate no longer meant anything in her life. He wasn't even an antagonist worthy of her hatred. He was merely a closed chapter. That evening, in her office on the top floor of the newly renamed Phoenix Tate Tower, Danielle stood gazing at the illuminated city. Her phone rang with a call from the mayor, confirming her formal support for Danielle's Senate campaign. "We're making the announcement next week," the mayor said excitedly. "Are you ready for this?" Danielle smiled, thinking of the journey that had brought her here, from a waitress with $20 in her pocket to potential United States Senator. "I was born ready," she answered simply. Meanwhile, in a much smaller apartment on the west side of the city, Jackson opened a business magazine with Danielle on the cover, proclaimed Businesswoman of the Decade. Beside her stood Elijah and Zoe, both smiling confidently. He traced their faces with his finger, recognizing his own eyes, his own chin in the features of those brilliant teenagers he would never call his children. Tears streamed down his face as he finally understood. He hadn't just lost a family 15 years ago, he had lost his own humanity. Danielle Carter hadn't needed revenge. Her sweetest victory wasn't acquiring Tate Industries or even surpassing Jackson in wealth and power. It was creating two extraordinary human beings who, like their mother, would never need validation from someone like him to know their true worth. While Danielle Carter ascended to the top floor of the now renamed Phoenix Tate Tower, she realized that her true victory wasn't in the billions accumulated or the company acquired, but in the journey that transformed a waitress with $20 in her pocket into a woman who finally didn't need to prove her worth to anyone. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.